This is CNN Breaking News.
I want to go straight to London. I want to bring in CNN royal correspondent Max Foster outside Buckingham Palace. Max, what are you learning?
The Queen has died, very sadly. She died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen Consort were referenced there to Charles. He automatically becomes King, will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. I'm just going to look at another email I just received, if there's any extra there. No, the Queen has died, and long live the King. I'm not going to call him King Charles because we don't know what his name will be, but all we know is the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon, which is horrific news for the nation, and I can only imagine how people feel watching this. You'll see that the flag over Buckingham Palace has been lowered to symbolise the Queen's death. I don't know quite what to say. I mean, this was the news we were dreading, but obviously what happened this afternoon was the Queen died and the family were informed and they headed up to Balmoral and they are there to pay their respects. There's a very clear process that follows. Now we would expect to hear from the King tonight in a televised address, and you'll start hearing bells tolling across London and indeed the nation, and flags lowered like this will be reflected at public buildings across the United Kingdom. And we now have a very clear process of about 10 days leading up to a funeral, but I don't want to give too much detail about the plans that I've seen because they do need to be signed off by the King to be formalised, but we'll be hearing more details about that, I'm sure, as the evening progresses. But Queen Elizabeth has died at the age of 96, which is a horrific moment for the UK, but also 14 other nations around the world, and indeed other nations where she wasn't head of state, who revered her as the longest serving and I'd say most revered head of state until she died this afternoon.
Max, let me just ask you, just personally, you have followed this family through much of your career. You're a royals correspondent. You have watched the Queen in good times and in bad times. What are your thoughts about her in this moment, about her reign, about her life, about her legacy?
I think what she did was extraordinary. She came to the throne in her 20s with a crumbling empire and many people talking about the death of the monarchy. And somehow she turned that into one of the most successful, arguably the most successful monarchy that Britain has ever seen. She reigned over a tumultuous period of British history, the media revolution, a loss of reverence in society. She's someone that we can't actually relate to because of the kind of life that she lived, but someone who we did ultimately learn to relate to because of the way she managed her monarchy. She remained relevant by embracing the media, by connecting with us, by speaking to us, by bringing in television cameras and showing her meeting other people. They're very simple little gestures, but things that made her relevant to us and made her relatable. She also was there in times of grief. Any national moment, we would look to her and she would be there for us. We would see her at regular events over the course of the year, so she tiptoed through our lives and she was always there. I think what is going to be very difficult is for us not to see her in our ultimate moment of grief, which is her dying. And we will now look to the King. We'll wait to hear whether or not the King keeps the name Charles, whether he's King Charles or he chooses another name. We will get details on that when a placard is put up there on the forecourt at Buckingham Palace, where he will, the formal announcement will be made and there'll be a reference to his name. We know that Camilla is now the Queen Consort, so she is Queen Camilla. Prince William is now the Duke of Cornwall. He will inevitably become the Prince of Wales because that's a title that will come to him, and he takes over the Duchy of Cornwall, and now Prince George is second in line to the throne. So this is a huge moment in British history and Commonwealth history, and I think for the world, because I think she transcended actually monarchy, and I think she was a truly global figure, and one who has a guaranteed place in the history books. And I'm now looking down at those people gathering outside the palace gates, and I think those numbers will escalate, and it will be a very emotional scene as this news sets in.
Christian?
It is very extraordinary to hear Max describe what's happened and keep using the word King Charles, or sorry, King, the new king, because for 70 years this country and the world has only known a queen, Queen Elizabeth. She was one of only a very few female monarchs of this kingdom, and incredibly successful, along with Queen Victoria, along with Queen Elizabeth I, and it's very difficult to know where the country will go in terms of its relationship with the monarchy, and it's probably too early even to talk about this now. But we are in a state of crisis here in the United Kingdom, like around the rest of the world, prompted by the war in Ukraine and by many other issues. Food poverty, energy poverty, inflation, strikes, people's unrest, not to mention climate, which she was very, by the way, devoted to, along with her fellow 96-year-old David Attenborough, who's a world-known figure as well. And that was, when we talk about how she never really did any interviews, she kind of did a quasi-interview with him, celebrating, I think, their 95th birthdays or something, some such event. And it was just amazing to see how she was, in her own way, really on the curve of important issues like the climate. Her late husband, Prince Philip, was very much on that issue as well. I think we saw the Queen decline in terms of morale and health when her husband, Prince Philip, died. We were both here reporting on his funeral. It was the last time we saw the Queen really out in public. Yes, we did on her Jubilee, but that was in the middle of COVID. She was all on her own, and I remember people speculating then about how she might continue her life without the man who was her life partner, not just personally but also professionally. And she did decline quite significantly after that with COVID. She had a bout of COVID with this euphemistically phrased mobility problems, which, she was 96 years old. Yeah, she had some trouble walking, but she was so often viewed standing, even in the last months, even in the last couple of days, as we pored over that last picture of her greeting her latest and her last Prime Minister, Liz Truss, the 15th Prime Minister of this country. We've heard from former Prime Ministers just before this announcement was made, Tony Blair, David Cameron, from different parties, wishing her and the family well, concerned about the news that was coming out in the past several hours. And as we've said, we know that President Biden, he's, I believe, the 14th or so president that she has known. She first knew President Truman and all the other US presidents. And yes, she's been the head of the Commonwealth. She's been surrounded by world leaders throughout the last 70 years and has given a message, I guess, of continuity. I guess that's it, continuity and stability in a very, very turbulent world, particularly throughout her reign.
Bianca Nobila, it's so interesting to hear Christian talk about Britain being at a crisis right now in terms of the economy, gas prices and the like. This is Queen Elizabeth II oversaw and was a steadying force through so many crises over the last 70 years of her reign. There is no telling now how the king, what his reign will be like, and what impact that will have. They're posting right now the statement of her death on the gates of Buckingham Palace. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon, the statement said. The King and Queen consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and return to London tomorrow, Thursday, 8th September 2022. That is the tradition, posting a statement on the gates of Buckingham Palace. Just watch.
Whoa.
Bianca,
That's it. That's
the person at the helm through so many crises over the last 70 years is is no longer there.
Oh yeah, it could be Windsor.
Is Anna Stewart there?
No, she is not. And she has been the through line, the continuity, a towering historical figure and living legend around the world and around the Commonwealth. Britain is not only on the verge of an economic crisis, but also an identity crisis. It's been buffeted, it's been challenged. To some extent, it's confused about its place in the world after Brexit. There's no longer peace on the European continent. It is a time of great flux and great uncertainty. And this is usually when the British public would look to the monarch. If you consider during the COVID-19 pandemic, she was referred to as the comforter-in-chief for the speeches that she gave to the nation, for the solace and the comfort that she provided. So this will be a moment of profound shock and grief, and I say this as I see the crowds swelling behind us outside the front of Buckingham Palace. And even, Anderson, on a personal level for me, I grew up in New Zealand where the Queen was also head of state, and once I moved to England she came to my primary school once or twice. I had the opportunity to meet her. She seems to have touched so many people's lives. Somehow a woman with such a dedication to her civic duty that was unerring. As Christiane and Max have said, abdication was never in her vocabulary. She loved this role. It wasn't just her duty. And Britain has lost one of their true historical greats this afternoon.
And a real patriot.
Well, the ultimate patriot, someone that dedicated her life ultimately to work and made many sacrifices. I think what we're looking for now, I'd expect the Prime Minister to make the first statement. She will come out in Downing Street, I'm sure, any moment now, and try to sum up what is a legacy which is so transcending because it covered 70 years of reign where so much changed. And yeah, there you go, the podium's out. So the podium comes out in Downing Street for state addresses. So Liz Truss, I mean, how many days has she been in office?
Two, for heaven's sake.
I mean, this arguably could define her career when we were talking about energy prices doing the same earlier today.
And Max, honestly, for the grandeur of the Queen's life and the expectation all throughout this day, I'm really struck by the simplicity of the message that has been affixed to the gates of Balmoral. The official so-called letter that announces the Queen's death. Just so utterly simple. No grand words, just the Queen died peacefully today, this afternoon, talking about the King and the Queen Consort who will remain in Balmoral until tomorrow. That's it. That's it. That's the formal announcement.
I think, as Bianca noted, the crowds coming out there, that's going to be, the really emotional moment. And people are going to be really shocked about how they feel. I mean, we had it with Diana, but this is times 10, I would argue. We're waiting for Liz Truss to come out. I'm sure, I haven't seen the website, but I think you'll see the royal website turning black. You'll start hearing cannons being fired at royal palaces. You'll see flags at half-staff across the nation and across the Commonwealth. And I think there's just going to be a massive outpouring of grief. A big test, a huge test for Liz Truss to try to express the nation at a moment where most people probably can't even find words.
Yeah. Max, I want to go to Matthew Chance, who is standing by outside 10 Downing Street. And Matthew, we should point out, it is not just the nation. It is not just people in Great Britain that are watching. It is the world that is watching and noting and mourning the passing of Queen Elizabeth II.
That's right. And of course, Queen Elizabeth II isn't just the Queen of Britain. She's the Queen of 15 countries. And so this is a loss on an international scale. You can see there's been a flurry of activity here in Downing Street. We showed you the flags earlier, flying at full staff. They've now been lowered to half staff, which is that sort of early official recognition of the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. You can also see that there's a lectern that's been put out in front of the door of 10 Downing Street in preparation for the Prime Minister to step outside her official residence and office and to address the cameras and to address the nation and, of course, to address the world at this moment of loss. It's an incredible, feat that she has got to embark on. It would be for anybody, given, that she has to be the sort of mourner in chief, if you like, for the nation, for the Commonwealth of Nations as well. And that would be difficult for, you know, anyone to do. But when you consider that Liz Truss has only been in this job for 2 days, and she's not, I think it's fair to say, the best public performer. At least she hasn't sort of fitted into that yet and got fully, you know, comfortable with it yet. It is going to be an enormous challenge for her. So it's going to be really interesting to hear what she has to say and how she says it as well. As I say, we don't know exactly when that door of number 10 Downing Street is going to open. I tried to get some timing on that a few moments ago from one of the Downing Street aides that was milling around outside here and setting up the lectern, but he said he didn't know.
Yeah.
But the expectation is it will happen sort of any moment now.
And Matthew, it was only on Tuesday that the British Prime Minister, the new British Prime Minister Liz Truss, met the Queen at Balmoral, and it's really the last photo that we have seen of the Queen.
It was, yes, and I've looked again at that photo very hard, and you can see that, I mean, the Queen's 96 years old, she was 96, and she looked very frail. In retrospect, looking back on it, you could see that she was not her old self. And obviously within days of that, a couple of days, 48 hours, you know, she's passed, and so this was obviously a very serious condition. There have been, you know, enormous preparations that have been planned for the death of Queen Elizabeth, really since the 1960s. I mean, 3 times a year, committees meet, they decide what the funeral arrangements are going to be. The Queen has had her own input in how she would like to be sort of seen off. There's an enormous security operation that is going to be swinging into action right now. I mean, it's going to be one of the biggest security operations that London has ever seen, because the expectation is there will be vast crowds of people coming to the British capital. It's going to involve the police, the other security forces, the armed forces, you know, transport, and all of those things working together for what will obviously be the funeral of the century for this country. And so that is now getting underway. The first step in that is going to be taking place already, and of course it has to unfold this plan. It's called Operation London Bridge, by the way. That was the code name that it's been given. And there was a special code phrase that it was said would be passed on to the Prime Minister when it was confirmed that the Queen was dead, and that was London Bridge is down. And so now obviously that has been passed on to the Prime Minister, and she's going to be coming out, as I say, in a couple of minutes. But, you know, concurrently with Operation London Bridge, the funeral arrangements for Queen Elizabeth II, Operation Springtide, which is the investiture, the coronation of a new monarch. Of course, it's going to be Charles. And so that also has to get underway as well. And so we're entering a period which is going to take some time in this country of enormous, you know, planning, minuscule planning, that is going to see these 2 enormous events for this nation and for the world sort of unfold in the way that Britain does these things, usually very well and planned, you know, to the planned to the last centimetre. And so, you know, those very complex operations are now getting underway.
And as we continue to look at the images from London, from Windsor Castle, from Balmoral, you see the crowds gathering, increasing in size outside Buckingham Palace, the notice of the Queen's death placed in a frame on the gates at Buckingham Palace. I'm joined here in New York, Zane Asher, Julia Chatterley as well. A remarkable moment for the history of this family, for the history of Great Britain and the Commonwealth countries, and for us all witnessing the death of a monarch that most of us have lived our whole lives seeing from afar.
I have to say, there are few moments that will rival this one in my lifetime, just in terms of scale, than being here watching what I'm seeing on my screen, the death, essentially, of Queen Elizabeth II. You know, we all remember where we were on 9/11, for example. And everybody watching this will remember where they were on the 8th of September 2022, 6:30 in the evening UK time, when it was announced that Queen Elizabeth II had died. This afternoon, all of us feared the worst, and of course the worst did actually happen, just announced 20 minutes ago. This is a time of just deep, deep grieving and mourning for the entire British population.
I think I'm an inferior journalist to my other British colleagues. I'm deeply saddened. I'm heartbroken for the family. I'm heartbroken for the British people that feel strongly about the royal family. And of course, there are those on both sides. The irony here, and I think the Queen herself would also appreciate it, is she's perhaps the best person to tell everyone how to handle this situation, to act with grace and calm. And I guess I fancifully imagine she's now looking down on Charles and saying, to steal the phrase, keep calm and carry on, because that's what is and does need to happen here. But I don't think for us we should underplay the emotion of the moment, the gravity of the moment, the fact that, and we keep saying to it, for most of us, we do not know a world without Queen Elizabeth II in it, and we don't know what's coming, and we don't know what kind of King Charles will make, even if he's going to be King Charles III, because we've had 2 Charles before. So
and he has been preparing his whole life for this moment.
How do you prepare? And the fact that you step into a job that you've been prepared for your life, but at the same time you have the heartbreak of losing your mother. And I think, again, it goes back to what we were saying. There are children here that are in mourning, grandchildren, great-grandchildren that will hear the news as well. As much as this is public mourning now, and it will continue for days to come, it is also a family that's deeply grieving. I think for those that love the Queen, whether you're a royalist or otherwise, and I think there are many of us out there, and I admit I'm one of them, I think the saving grace in this moment, and I think Christiane said it best when she said about the 17 months that have passed since Queen Elizabeth lost her soulmate in Prince Philip, and actually I believe that they're united somewhere now, and I'm sure the first thing she says to him is, you know, this 17 months was the longest of my life.
I want to go to Richard Quest, who is in Singapore at this hour watching events and covering them as well. Richard, your thoughts on this sad day?
Incredible sadness and upset. The Queen has been, Julia summed it up. I mean, you know, look, I'm a monarchist. I supported the Queen, and she has been part of my life from the get-go. And therefore tonight, I mean, even saying King Charles, you know, we've joked about it sort of in the past, and people say King Charles, but now it's King Charles. And William is the next behind, and everything moves on. So incredible sadness for those of us who have lived in the UK, who have been part of the Queen's reign, and an element of what uncertainty of what comes next is clearly how it all machinates. At a time, Anderson, of great international tension. The Queen was rock solid. The Queen was always there. We used to have a saying, you know, what would the Queen say? What would the Queen do? Well, now we haven't got that, but we'll get on. We'll move on. But tonight, the way I feel at the moment, I can sum it up in one word: deep upset and sadness.
It is such a difficult role to step in for. I mean, she has defined this role for generations of people all around the world, and for Prince Charles, whatever King, if he takes the name King Charles or whatever name he takes, trying to figure out how you be a king in this modern age, in this modern Great Britain.
Right. Oh, look, you ask a lot of Brits and they'll say, well, perhaps Charles, it would have been nice if he just skipped Charles and went straight to William. But that's not the way monarchy works. You don't pick and choose your monarchs if you're going to follow the system. Charles doesn't have the charisma of William. He doesn't have but he has had a life of duty as well. And he has served the country loyally and with great dignity over many years, except, of course, for the years where, of course, his personal life created scandal. But he is steeped in the future. He was ahead of the game with environmental issues. He was ahead of the game on climate change. He's ahead of the game on a lot of thoughts that are now normal, he was suggesting years ago. So, King, there you have it. I was about to say Prince Charles. No, King Charles, and it's Prince William who will become the Prince of Wales. now he has to rise to that occasion. I believe he's going to speak to the country or in a pre-recorded message at some point in the next few hours, to 24 hours. And then he will have the job of uniting the United Kingdom at a time when there are such great fears and unease. But I just can't, I mean, look, I'm going to London tonight. You know, obviously to be in London for the week between death and funeral, and I just can't imagine what it's going to be like.
Yeah. We should also point out, you mentioned Prince William. He's now the Duke of Cornwall, will be the Prince of Wales. Prince George, his son, becomes the second in line, as Max Foster pointed out a short time ago, and second line to the throne, and I believe was just starting school today, or at least several of the children were, which is why, extraordinary. First day of school. He's now second in line to the throne. I want to bring in Kate Williams, a CNN royal commentator and historian, Badisha Mamata, British broadcaster and journalist, Sally Bettle-Smith, historian and biographer, and Carolyn Harris, also a historian and author. Badisha, let me start with you. Your thoughts in this extraordinary moment in world history.
I feel an extraordinary sense of respectful reflection. For me, this was about nearly a century lived, an extraordinary time span which has seen so many changes in world history, undergone with a sense of duty, intelligence, forethought, self-control. The role of a monarch is to keep it all together. I don't believe that in the UK, the monarchy is purely symbolic. I think the Queen had a huge amount of power and respect behind the scenes. And I would love to know how she used it, because from the very first day, it could not have been easy. She didn't run towards the crown with open arms. She did it because she used her mind, she calculated, and she thought, this is my duty, I must do this. And she did it incredibly well. That's why you have people at all points on the political spectrum paying tribute to her now. It's an extraordinary feat to survive in a reign for decades upon decades, with all sorts of things happening, including within your own family, weathering scandals and world events, and coming to power at such a crucial time, the post-war period, when it was all about international community, picking up the rubble of the war and keeping things and communities and peoples together.
Carolyn Harris, again, it's hard to imagine after 70 years of one person on the throne, a change now at this time.
It's very difficult to imagine anyone else in that role. And many people's feelings are similar to how people around the world felt on the passing of Queen Victoria in 1901, that she had lent her name to the era, was the Victorian era. And so for many people, this is one of those historic moments where they take stock of just how much social and cultural and political change has taken place over such a long reign. The Queen came to the throne in 1952. She reigned for 70 years, and she's become synonymous with the institution for many people.
And Carolyn, I mean, she came to the throne. She was in Kenya when her father died, came back to Britain. She came to the throne in such a different time, such a different country, and the power of Britain on the world stage was so different, and yet oversaw, was a constant presence throughout all the changes that we've witnessed over the last 70 years.
Yes, the Queen has overseen that transition from a British Empire and dominions to a Commonwealth of equal nations, and she took her role as head of the Commonwealth very seriously and became the most well-traveled monarch in history, believing that I have to be seen to be believed. And so she has been present in the various Commonwealth countries, attended Commonwealth heads of government meetings, and was key to keeping together the Commonwealth when there was such a wide variety of different political views among the Commonwealth realms and republics.
Sally Bettle-Smith, it's so interesting the way she went about her job and maintaining kind of the mystery and some of magic of monarchy. I mean, for whether people support it, like it, or don't, she kept a distance so that there was some mystery to it.
Was wise enough, particularly after the death of Diana, to learn how to move the monarchy forward incrementally. And she was much more in touch in a personal way with people. And, so I think, she's always been incredibly wise, and she has never sort of gone out, she never went out sort of over her skis. She always sort of had almost a sixth sense of knowing not to be too far ahead of where the public was, but yet to bring them along when it was necessary. And, I think in terms of the transition now, she has, particularly it's notable that over the past month when Charles was up in Balmoral, he was with her many days. And I think it's important to remember that she has given him many tutorials on leadership. I mean, at one point he said, "We learn by observing." And he's obviously learned by doing as well. But she has, as her father did before her, she has provided a model and a guidebook, in a way, for him to reign.
Kate Williams, unclear what the monarchy will look like under the new king, but talk just a little bit about how Queen Elizabeth defined her role and came into her role.
Yes, Queen Elizabeth, she has defined Britain and the countries of which she's head of state. This is the Elizabethan era, the second Elizabethan era, from 1952 to 2022. She's seen all the changes. When she came to the throne, most people in Britain didn't have a car or a telephone, or many of us didn't have an inside bathroom. We were mostly manual labourers, and she's seen such great changes. And this little girl who was born in 1926, wasn't intended to be queen, was expected to make a good aristocratic marriage. Her uncle abdicates, she was thrown into this new place, and has become, I think, people will see her as the most successful British monarch in history. People will look back on her reign, her great legacy, and they will really say, this is the greatest monarch we have ever had. I think her reign will be the high moment of monarchy, the high watermark of monarchy. And I think of when she gave her first televised message at Christmas in 1957, she said, "It is inevitable that I'll be a remote figure to many of you." But that hasn't been the case. She's been held in so much affection, so much love. There's an outpouring of grief. People really do see her as the nation's grandmother. And there's going to be, Britain, I think, is in shock. The world is in shock. This is a moment that people will never forget. And we really did think that even though, she's getting older, she's 96, she all seems so in such great health. I think we really thought she'd be here forever, and it's really going to be a moment of real reflection and a lot of pain in days to come.
Yeah. I want to go back to Buckingham Palace, Max Foster, Christiane Amanpour, Bianca Nobilo. Max, I know there, as we've been talking about, the schedule of events moving forward has been gone over for decades. By the staff of the royal family, as they've been refined. What do we, or what can you say, or what do we know about the next 24 hours even?
I've got it.
He's talking to you. What do we know about the next 24
sorry,
hours?
Anson, I literally just got a
I know you have a lot of information
just got
coming
a statement from, it's a statement from the King on the Queen's death. Imagine what it's like to write these words. The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. So that's a statement from the new King of the United Kingdom. We don't yet have his name. It could be Charles, could choose another name. He will currently be focused on arrangements at Balmoral right now. There is a set plan in place. He needs to sign that off, so I don't want to say too much about the exact plans, but the coffin will be held in the ballroom, and overnight staff and family will have an opportunity to pay their respects at Balmoral with the coffin, and tomorrow we'd expect that coffin to move to Edinburgh for another period of mourning at the capital of Scotland before the body's brought back here to England. So there's a huge amount for them to consider up in Balmoral right now, and a huge amount for us all to consider when trying to assess what is the most incredible legacy of any head of state. Britain's Queen Elizabeth II, crowned at Westminster Abbey on June the 2nd, 1953. This was the first time the public was able to witness this sacrosanct moment. Elizabeth had allowed live television cameras in to capture it, in a powerful signal that this was a new, open and relevant monarchy. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, known as Lilibet to friends, was born on April the 21st, 1926. It was only a decade later that she knew she was truly destined to lead an empire. It was a fluke of history, a work of scandal.
A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as King and Emperor.
Her uncle, Edward, abdicated to marry the love of his life, Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee and therefore spoiler to the throne. Elizabeth's father became king. She was the accidental heir, which entrenched in her a sense of duty. She was devout, almost spiritual about her responsibilities as a royal, even before being crowned.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
I seem to remember having listened to that speech, and I remember very well, I certainly remember reading it not many years later, the way she dedicated her life to the country. And that was an example which I very much felt that when I grew older, that was what it was about.
The death of Her
British Prime
Majesty
Minister
the
Liz
Queen
Truss is speaking. Let's
is a
listen.
huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her. She ascended the throne just after the Second World War. She championed the development of the Commonwealth from a small group of 7 countries to a family of 56 nations, spanning every continent of the world. We are now a modern, thriving, dynamic nation. Through thick and thin, Queen Elizabeth II provided us with the stability and the strength that we needed. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. Her life of service stretched beyond most of our living memories. In return, she was loved and admired by the people in the United Kingdom and all around the world. She has been a personal inspiration to me and to many Britons. Her devotion to duty is an example to us all. Earlier this week, at 96, she remained determined to carry out her duties as she appointed me as her 15th Prime Minister. Throughout her life, she's visited more than 100 countries, and she has touched the lives of millions around the world. In the difficult days ahead, we will come together with our friends across the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and the world to celebrate her extraordinary lifetime of service. It is a day of great loss, but Queen Elizabeth II leaves a great legacy. Today, the crown passes, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, our new head of state, His Majesty, King Charles III. With the King's family, we mourn the loss of his mother, and as we mourn, we must come together as a people to support him, to help him bear the awesome responsibility that he now carries for us all. We offer him our loyalty and devotion, just as his mother devoted so much to so many for so long. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
I want to bring in our Max Foster, who's outside Buckingham Palace. It's Britain's new Prime Minister, only on the job some 2 days. She met with the Queen at Balmoral on Tuesday, as all new Prime Ministers do. Liz Truss is her name. Max Foster, outside Buckingham Palace. I'm wondering what you made of her statement. She also referred to the new king as King Charles III. Is that officially his name, or do we know?
Well, it's difficult to know. I mean, one would assume that is the name he's going to choose. Just to clarify for people watching, that a new monarch doesn't have to keep the name that they had as Prince of Wales, so we didn't know whether he'd be King Charles, but there you have the Prime Minister referring to him as King Charles III. My understanding was the announcement on the name would come in a placard at Buckingham Palace, but the rules keep changing, and what you've got to understand is years and years of worth of work has gone into this death plan, if I can call it that. But ultimately, it was the king that would have to sign it off, and we're assuming that's the case. So we're assuming he's taken the name of Charles III, and so that's interesting. We can call him King Charles now. I thought it was interesting that she's opened with, I think, a very well thought out phrase, which is she was the rock the country was built on, and I think she is the rock, and I think the foundations of that rock have slipped today, and it's going to be very hard to see how people are going to cope. And this is the typical way, of course, that we recognise someone's death. We lay flowers. I cannot imagine how many flowers are coming to London right now, and we're going to see how the nation responds. But that's the first official response we've really had from the Prime Minister. We've also heard from King Charles as well, a brief statement from him. We'll be expecting to hear a pre-recorded statement from him to be played out on primetime television tonight.
And Max, I think one of the words that King Charles used to describe his mother in his statement was respect, and that is now being reflected from all the messages that are pouring in from around the world. From the White House, we've heard that the press secretary has extended the condolences of President Biden. We know the President of Ireland has extended his sadness and condolences, and we're hearing even from President Zelensky of Ukraine, who says he's reacting with deep sadness. The Prime Minister, the young female Prime Minister of Finland as well. So these messages are now going to be rolling in, and that's going to, culminate in these few days now of formalities, because it will be formalities that's hugely scripted and has been highly rehearsed, you can believe it, with stand-ins and all the others, and it will now play out. Britain will now start to do what Britain is best at, frankly, and that is pomp, that is circumstance, that is a sense of occasion. And despite the sadness of the nation, which also will be manifest because emotion is now shown, as perhaps it wasn't before until Diana died, there will be a lot of sadness, but there will also be, the show will go on. That's the best way to say it.
The system's built for.
Bianca, is it clear when the funeral will actually be? I mean, I don't want to ask anything impolite, but in different cultures, there are different religions, there are different times for how quickly a funeral takes place. Obviously, this is a unique circumstance. Is it known yet when that might be?
Our understanding is it will be around the 10-day mark. As Max was mentioning earlier, there are details which are yet to be finalised because it would ultimately be at the discretion of King Charles III. Anderson, I would say Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, giving that speech on the steps of Downing Street, is just yet another example, actually, of the Queen's ability to win people over and generate within them a sense of admiration for her duty and her self-sacrifice, because Liz Truss earlier in her career was not a fan of the monarchy, but I'm told now from people close to her that she is now devotedly so. And that was an authentic and a genuine speech which she just delivered, speaking about Queen Elizabeth II's sense of devotion, the fact she is the rock on which modern Britain was built, that she is the spirit of Great Britain with her dignity and grace. And I think most poignantly, as she finished that speech, saying the passing of the second Elizabethan age has now happened, and she said that she would end with the words that the Queen would have wished, which is, God save King Charles III.
We are now in a period of mourning, national mourning, until the day of the funeral, which, as Bianca says, we expect to be in 10 or 11 days' time. Before then, there will be the coffin will be in Scotland for a few days, and then brought down to the United Kingdom. There will be royal mourning for a month. So this will be something that no one really, very few people can remember. They've never experienced anything like this. So I think this is going to be a real shock to the United Kingdom going forward. What you'll see over the next 10 or so days is a process where we look back to the previous monarchy and mark that, but equally as important, we'll be looking forward to the next monarchy. So each day will interchange, but today we're very much thinking about looking back on an extraordinary monarch's career.
And I think also that
Britain's Queen Elizabeth II, crowned at Westminster Abbey on June the 2nd, 1953. This was the first time the public was able to witness this sacrosanct moment. Elizabeth had allowed live television cameras in to capture it, in a powerful signal that this was a new, open and relevant monarchy. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, known as Lilibet to friends, was born on April the 21st, 1926. It was only a decade later that she knew she was truly destined to lead an empire. It was a fluke of history, a work of scandal.
A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as King and Emperor.
Her uncle Edward abdicated to marry the love of his life, Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee and therefore spoiler to the throne. Elizabeth's father became king. She was the accidental heir, which entrenched in her a sense of duty. She was devout, almost spiritual, about her responsibilities as a royal, even before being crowned.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
I seem to remember having listened to that speech and I remember very well, I certainly remember reading it not many years later, the way she dedicated her life to the country. And that was an example which I very much felt that when I grew older, that was what it was about. You dedicate your life to your country.
On November the 20th, 1947, she wed her childhood sweetheart, the tall and dashing Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, titled the Duke of Edinburgh. The following year, their marriage bore Elizabeth's heir, Prince Charles. For more than half a century, the Queen led her empire, before overseeing its managed decline as it became known as the Commonwealth, an association of now independent countries.
Sir Winston and Lady Churchill came to receive Her Majesty.
Her first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill. During her rule, she met every acting US president bar one, meetings that she always prioritised.
She remembers learning from her parents how important keeping America on side was during the war, and then America came into the war. She remembers that so well. She remembers, you know, the American troops, D-Day, all that. To her, it's a very important part of her growing up.
Whilst the British monarch has no political power, Elizabeth wielded immense power as a figurehead, as demonstrated in 2011 when she became the first monarch to visit neighbouring Ireland since its separation from the United Kingdom.
We can all see things which we would wish.
Then Prime Minister David Cameron described the trip as a game changer in Anglo-Irish relations. A year later, the Queen travelled to Belfast in another significant moment of her reign. An historic handshake with former IRA commander Martin McGuinness, a public symbol of peace following decades of conflict in Northern Ireland. There was, nonetheless, a very private side to this wife, mother and grandmother. Stiff upper-lipped in public and so guarded there's little footage to show the sense of humour she's reputed to have displayed behind closed doors. On occasion, she did open up. With uncharacteristic candour and emotion, the Queen herself marked 1992 as a very bad year.
It has turned out to be an annus horribilis,
punctuated by several family splits and a fire at her beloved Windsor Castle. 3 of her 4 children would divorce, Charles most famously, and then that crash.
We are just getting word that the French government has informed all of us that Princess Diana has died.
The royal family's restrained response collided with a British public convulsing in heartache. Elizabeth learned a tough lesson through all of the grief. She wasn't merely a mother or a grandmother, rather a queen to a people, no matter what. An enduring image, the Queen bowing her head to Princess Diana's coffin, marking a sad period for the royal family, Britain, and its relationship with the monarchy. Over more than a decade, however, public faith in the royal family did rebuild. The Queen was visibly thrilled by the show of support for the royal wedding between her grandson William and partner Kate in 2011. Then the following year, polls showed the British royal family at the height of their popularity as the Queen celebrated 60 years on the throne. She used her Diamond Jubilee to present a slimmed-down monarchy. Only the key royals paraded and waved, a sign of a more economic family for the 21st century. In later years, the Queen welcomed several additions to the family, including Prince George, her first great-grandson and future heir to the throne, born in 2013 to the then Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. Reflecting the modern age, Prince Harry later married Meghan Markle, the royal family extending again to embrace an actress with African-American ancestry, in time welcoming baby Archie. Prince Philip retired from public duties in 2017. Meanwhile, the Queen continued indefatigable. She gradually slowed her busy schedule, certainly in terms of travel, but in September 2015, whilst opening a new railway in Scotland, without ceremony or commemorative fireworks, Queen Elizabeth II passed her revered predecessor, Victoria, to become Britain's longest-reigning monarch. Controversy visited the family again in 2019 as the Queen's second son, Prince Andrew, gave an ill-advised interview to the BBC amid allegations of sexual misconduct.
I let the side down.
Any hopes for a quieter year ahead were dashed when Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, made a shock announcement at the start of 2020.
This is the last time they'll be walking into the Abbey.
Giving up their public roles and duties, they moved to North America with a mission to become financially independent. Crisis talks and another contentious interview soon followed. In 2021, at the age of 99, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, passed away. Senior royals attended the funeral, scaled back due to coronavirus, to celebrate his 7 decades of service and mourn the passing of a devoted husband, father, grandfather and great-grandfather.
We therefore pray.
Elizabeth stood alone as she watched his coffin lower into the royal vault in Windsor, bidding farewell to her husband of 73 years, the man she described as her strength and stay. she will be remembered as one of the great monarchs, able to hand a strengthened crown to her heir, despite reigning over a period of tumultuous change. My wife. Today the crown passes, as the Prime Minister says, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, our new head of state, His Majesty King Charles III. And as Christiane says, life goes on. Prince William now becomes the Duke of Cornwall and Cambridge. Kate is the Duchess of Cornwall and Cambridge. And they will, as tradition dictates, become the Prince and Princess of Wales. The King will bestow those titles, I'm sure, in the coming days. But we now look ahead, Christiane, to a state funeral unlike anything I think we've seen before, certainly not in the media age.
Well, exactly. I mean, you look back at some of the great funerals that have happened in this country during her reign. First, obviously, Winston Churchill's was a huge affair, and I covered the funeral of her mother, Queen Elizabeth, the widow of King George V, and that was a huge affair. But this is bound to be much bigger, and as you said, her body will lie in state for a period of time. For people to view, and this country and this city, you can be sure, you know, they're already putting up the barricades along the Mall and along, you know, the famous routes that royal, you know, corteges take. There will be a huge turnout for that, and for all the steps.
I think they're planning on
that.
Queues for miles going into Westminster Hall.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And when you look at these pictures in the obituary that you made so well, you know, you just you have to say, wow. What about those outfits? I'm sorry to sound, you know, sort of trivial, but that also defined her. The hat, the gloves, the coat, everything matched perfectly, and often with certain messages for whatever occasion she was at. So remember, and I'm leading to one of her great recent meetings in green, the colour of Ireland, with Martin McGuinness, a former IRA member who was devoted to blowing up the monarchy, and in fact is considered to have had part in the death of her beloved uncle, Lord Mountbatten, who was the last Governor General of India before independence. In any event, he was assassinated, and all those years later, as you saw in those pictures, Queen Elizabeth stepped along with history and was able to shake his hand. And actually, there was a little bit of fondness between them. Martin McGuinness talked about it too before he died.
And we've just had a heartfelt message of condolence as well from the leader of Sinn Féin. But I think what Christiane says is an important point. When we think back to her outfits, today we keep speaking about her as the 96-year-old
I'm sorry, I have to Bianca, I just have to
But
interrupt.
in her
Prime
youth,
Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada is speaking, so I just want to go there.
In the world, and I will miss her so. C'est avec une grande tristesse que nous apprenons aujourd'hui.
Prime Minister Trudeau speaking about his feelings, clearly emotional at the news, the death of Queen Elizabeth II here in New York with Zain Asher. And Zain, I'm wondering Julia Chatterley as well, I'm sorry, I had a brain freeze there for a moment. There is so much now that is regimented that will take place over the next several days, but for this funeral, the exact date for it has not been set, but the plans have already been made. I mean, this is sort of already planned out, every detail, all the details we've been seeing just over the last hour or so, those were all planned out.
It's, Christiane and Max were saying the blueprint for this is enormous. It can be tweaked with, and I'm sure has been tweaked with over the past weeks and months as well. I think the way that we tend to talk about this is nothing's confirmed until it's officially confirmed. So while we have loose guidelines, and I know Max said and Bianca was saying there around perhaps 10 days for the funeral, nothing at this stage, despite all the pre-planning that goes into place and the operational names that they have for this, is concrete yet. So it's just a case of feeling our way. I think some of the very important questions are what happens with the government, with Parliament, because the country does go into a period of mourning, and things do grind to a halt.
You were pointing out to me something which I hadn't considered with the currency changes.
Well, national anthem, police uniforms, passports, eventually all of that will have to change.
These are the longer term things, and the point is, again, we grew up with currency, the pound notes, the currency, the coin currency as well all has Queen Elizabeth's face
So
on
it always has to have the
Postage
reigning
stamps.
monarch on it?
Absolutely. So these are long-term things,
Yeah,
but I think
that will
in
take
the
time
shorter
for
term,
those changes will,
in the shorter term, we go into a period now of mourning where various protocols are and do come into play, but there are other things in the country that are very important at this moment too, and not only to mention that we've only had the current Prime Minister for just a couple of days, and so big decisions have to be made and perhaps won't be.
And just talk about the emotion of this moment. You know, we always knew that this day would come. Let's be candid about this. She was 96 years old. She had a series of health emergencies, but that doesn't make it any less distressing. And that's the thing about grief. You know, no matter how prepared you think you are, it always does seem to come as a surprise. I'm personally, as somebody who was born and raised in the UK, I'm in shock right now. Queen Elizabeth famously declared, as you remember, Julia, 1992 as her annus horribilis. But I think for a lot of people who admire the royal family, for a lot of royalists, for a lot of people who admire the Queen, this is really the annus horribilis. And I think that many people have feared. My mind does go to the new king right now. A lot of people are talking about the fact that, gosh, can you imagine grieving your mother, mourning the death of your mother, and then almost immediately having to contend with the pressures of absorbing the responsibilities of arguably the most important role in the world. People say, yes, you know, but he's prepared for this. He's been preparing for this his entire life. Yes and no. Of course, he's lived his entire life in front of a long lens camera. We understand that, but nothing can prepare you for what is about to happen. He has not just lost his mother, but he is presiding over the dawn of a completely new era in Great Britain.
I think many would say, though, that Prince Charles, the personal side, has been ready for many years and prepared for this moment, and that's part of the process of being royal and the preparation in place. But I do think, and I think your point is a very accurate one, that for now at least, this period is about mourning, it's about a family. Whether you like the monarchy or not, I think most people have a view on this Queen, and they have a view on what she represents to the nation. And for all the change to come, she's a piece of a part of our lives, whether in your heart or otherwise, that I don't think anybody else that follows has.
We were talking before, off camera, about sort of a sense of humor that she had, or a willingness to kind of play along and talk at the Olympics. I don't know if we have the footage, but
really
there was that
hope
great
we do.
parachuting.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the beauty. I think we all have our sort of memories and our own personal experiences, and this in particular for me, I think, crystallizes her strength, her humour, naughtiness that we talked about before, was when Great Britain held the Olympics. And there was a scene where she was with James Bond, Daniel Craig at the time, yes, and parachuted out.
It appeared as if the Queen had parachuted out.
Just to be clear, just to be very clear. And I hope we've got the images because it's great.
I don't think we do. We'll have to get them.
So the stunt double wore her pink dress and it went viral. People were asking, did the Queen actually?
Right. And then she basically, the stunt double landed and then she walked out.
Of course, and you just see the small smile of appreciation. I mean, that I think embodies strength, humour, and though we didn't see that much of her in that regard, and she was and is, I think, royal, regal to the very end.
As you said, working up to the very end.
This is something else that we haven't really spoken about, the fact that we talked about how she looked and that megawatt smile, actually, that she gave the new UK
on Tuesday,
Prime Minister,
meeting
just on Tuesday, even to the end. I mean, we've shown images of when she began as Queen too, even to the end, a life of service. And I think there's something very poignant about looking at that image again now, knowing that she's passed.
We are getting more reaction to the Queen's death from the British people from around the world. CNN's coverage continues right after this.